The IMC Chamber of Commerce and Industries Knowledge, Skill and Education Committee, jointly with Bombay Teachers Training College, welcomes each one of you to this session on Neurons To Nations, how investing in early childhood development builds healthy societies. The lecture will address how healthy development in the early years provides the building blocks for educational achievement, economic productivity, responsible citizenship, lifelong health, strong communities, and successful parenting of the next generation. We have with us Professor Neil Bootsby, Mr. Anand Singhania, who is the President of IMC Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Ms. Sheetal Kalro, Deputy Director General, IMC Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Dr. Naveen Panjabi, Vice Principal HR College and Chairperson, IMC Knowledge, Skill and Education Committee, Co-Chairperson, IMC Knowledge, Skill and Education Committee, and Ms. Vedika Bodar, Co-Chairperson, IMC Knowledge and Education Committee. It's my privilege to welcome Dr. Balani, our principal, and I request him to felicitate Professor Neil Bootsby. Welcome you, sir, to BTTC. I also request Professor Balani to welcome Mr. Anand Singhania and present to him a small token of our love. Thank you. We welcome you, sir. It's Mr. Anand, President, IMC Chamber of Commerce and Industry and CEO of JK Enterprises, here to give the welcome speech. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Very good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to extend a warm welcome to each one of you on this talk on Neurons To Nations, how investing in early childhood development builds healthy societies, by Dr. Neil Bootsby, Professor and Director, Global Center for the Development of the Whole Child, University of Notre Dame. I thank Dheeraj Mehra, Director of Initiatives in India for Notre Dame, and Dr. Bhagwan Balani, Principal of Bombay Teachers Training College, for organizing this event jointly with the IMC. I have chosen IMC theme for this year's Partnering for Growth, and I'm very happy that we are working on this great initiative together. India has a very unique demographic profile, since it's the world's second most populous country. We have a close to 1/3 of the population below the age of 15. It is this young population which over the next 3-4 decades will unleash its productive forces on the economy. This will give our country what is described as demographic dividend. There are around 255 million youth in the age group from 15 to 25, and only 110 million of them are in education. So the rest are either working or they are unemployed. A lot needs to be done to increase the ratio of advanced learning. The government of India has put in a target from 27% to bring this up to 50%, so that more people come into the workforce which are skilled, and we take full advantage of the demographic dividend. So to enjoy this demographic dividend, India needs to invest in the young population in terms of health and education. As they say, a healthy mind leads to a healthy body. A healthy mind can be developed through proper education and inculcations of values from childhood. This calls for a robust education system for our young population. Of course, the teaching starts, learning, values start at home, but the education system is a very important factor to make it a complete human being. The second factor to pay attention is nutrition. Unfortunately, India's nutrition status is not up to the mark. There is pervasive malnutrition and undernutrition among children. This leads to stunting and wasting. It is also recognized that the first 1,000 days of newborn are more critical in its future growth. It is in this context that we must discuss Neurons to the Nations, how healthy development in the early years provides the building blocks for educational achievement, economic productivity, responsible citizenship, lifelong health, strong communities, and successful parenting for the next generation. I firmly believe investing in strengthening of delivery of education and nutrition will contribute to the country's economic growth from a long-term perspective. Before I conclude, I'd like to say a few words of the IMC Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber is a 100-year-plus organization servicing the trade, industry and commerce, with its membership base of over 5,000 members and over 150 trade associations affiliated to it. The Chamber represents and advocates the interests of over 400,000 businesses across the country from diverse sectors of trade and commerce. Through its various expert committees, IMC provides policy inputs for the government, both through central and state, and is continuously engaged in interaction with policymakers at various levels of government authorities. We organize interactive dialogues, workshops, seminars, business conferences, and other activities where men in business, businessmen, and governments engage with members on a wide range of issues to create an environment for sustained economic growth. The Chamber is now also a cradle for young talent. It promotes gender equality through its Young Leaders Forum and the IMC Ladies Wing, which has become an embodiment of growth, enterprise, positivism, and movement for women empowerment and entrepreneurship. With these few words, I once again thank you all and look forward to a very interesting session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Singhania. I now welcome Mr. Dheeraj Mehra to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Neil Boothby. Over to you, sir.
I think before happy to spaces in a room rather than doing this over Zoom. So over the past 2 years, we've done a lot of events, a lot of lectures. This is the first one we're doing in person. So I'm really happy and excited to be here for that. Dr. Boothby is the professor and director of the Global Center for Development of the Whole Child at the University of Notre Dame. He leads an interdisciplinary team which strives to create positive outcomes for children and youth who face adversity. Currently, the center works with NGOs, policymakers and communities in 25 countries to not only fulfill children's and youth's basic needs, but also promote nurturing relationships, socioeconomic skills, and civic engagement. Neil himself is an internationally recognized expert and advocate for children affected by war, displacement, and abject poverty. As a senior representative of UNICEF, UNHCR, and Save the Children, he has worked for more than 30 years with children in adversity in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Eastern Europe. In India, Neil leads Project Sampurna, the center's project in partnership with the Telangana government. The project aims to build, operate, and replicate a whole child development model for education in India through a holistic systems engagement. Working with about 450 social welfare and tribal welfare residential schools, Project Sampurna aims to strengthen and provide high-quality, holistic and value-based education to marginalized children that is on par with the education we see in our schools in big cities. It will also enable social mobility and empowerment through a variety of curricular and extracurricular activities. Neil has served as the US government's special advisor under President Obama's administration and at the USAID's Administrator's Senior Coordinator of Government Foreign Assistance Policy for Children globally. Neil is also the recipient of several awards for his field work, including the Red Cross Humanitarian Award of the Year Award for his work with child soldiers, the Mickey Leyland Award for his work on behalf of uprooted people, the United Nations Golden Achievement Award for excellence in social sector activities, and Duke University's Humanitarian Service Award. Please join me as I invite Professor Neil Boothby to give his lecture today, Neurons To Nation, How Investing in Early Childhood Development Builds Healthy Society.
Well, thank you very much. My goodness, I'm looking out at you all. What a handsome group. Really honored to spend some time with you. So thank you for those of you that set this up, and thank you for those of you that have come. Let's see. Yes, okay, we're going to start looking at a few statements. And if you read these statements, if you can you see them? Is that better? Okay, thank you. Are you able to see them? Okay, the first one, I want you to think about, is this just advocacy or is it science-based? So, the first one, if we want to shape the future, to improve the world, we have 1,000 days to do so, mother by mother, child by child. Now this was written by Roger Thoreau, who was the Wall Street Journal science editor, and then he left the paper and he did extensive research, and this was one of his main conclusions. So let's, as we progress in the talk, let's come back to this and see, is this just advocacy or is it actually based on science? The next one, which I think is important for those of you that are going to become teachers, 60 to 70% of the achievement gap between rich and poor children is already evident before you start formal school. Is that true? Can we prove that? And if it is provable, what are the implications for actually investing in families before children come to school? So we have mothers playing important roles, we have households potentially playing important roles. And the last one is early education for disadvantaged children has the highest return on public investment in the world. So it's good that we have our chamber here, and we have some private sector people listening to this, and government people. If you're going to invest in a healthy society, where do you start? Is it just higher education, or is it elsewhere, and is it and or? Okay. Now, Science 1. We can now, through neuroscience, epigenetics, human development, psychology, and whatnot, we can actually look at it particularly through neural imaging. We can look at how brains develop. We can actually see how they develop, and we can simulate that development. So this short video is a simulation of how brains develop early in life.
A child's experiences during the earliest years of life have a lasting impact on the architecture of the developing brain. Genes provide the basic blueprint, but experiences shape the process. process that determines whether a child's brain will provide a strong or weak foundation for all future learning, behavior, and health. During this important period of brain development, billions of brain cells called neurons send electrical signals to communicate with each other. These connections form circuits that become the basic foundation of brain architecture. Circuits and connections proliferate at a rapid pace and are reinforced through repeated use. Our experiences and environment dictate which circuits and connections get more use. Connections that are used more grow stronger and more permanent. Meanwhile, connections that are used less fade away through a normal process called pruning. Well-used circuits create lightning-fast pathways for neural signals to travel across regions of the brain. Simple circuits form first, providing a foundation for more complex circuits to build on later. Through this process, neurons form strong circuits and connections for emotions, motor skills, behavioral control, logic, language, and memory during the early critical period of development. With repeated use, these circuits become more efficient and connect to other areas of the brain more rapidly. While they originate in specific areas of the brain, the circuits are interconnected. You can't have one type of skill without the others to support it. Like building a house, everything is connected, and what comes first forms a foundation for all that comes later.
Fundamentally, then, what this slide represents is what the film basically covers. So point one is, brains are built over time, and starting in the earliest years. Simple skills come first, and more complex skills build on top of them. So if we don't get the basics right, we're not going to get the higher cognitive parts right. Cognitive, emotional, and social capabilities are intertwined. They're linked. Social, emotional skills are the brick and mortar for cognitive academic achievement and development. And a strong foundation in the early years improves the odds for positive outcomes. And conversely, a weak foundation increases the odds of lifelong problems. Now this graph shows, sort of the progression of development. And you'll see that on this graph because it actually disproportionately represents what happens in terms of cognitive development. And you'll notice the lines go up and then they go down. That's called pruning. It's a natural process that as circuitry is developed, as you develop skills rapidly, then they start to decline as other skills begin to take place. So that's sort of a natural process called pruning. But you'll see here that all the critical basics of cognitive development from hearing, vision, language, higher cognitive functions take place during this period of time. So we don't get higher cognitive functions unless these earlier skills are in place. This graph represents what's called plasticity. So the brain's plasticity, or its ability to adapt flexibly, is higher, much higher during infancy and childhood than it is in old age as you get older. So someone like myself, I'm less able to learn new things than almost all of you sitting in the audience. Now those of us that are older, we claim something called wisdom. Be careful if you believe any of the wisdom that elders put out there. But you see in some ways, again, just the basic plasticity of brain development, the ability to adapt and learn new things is much, much higher when you're an infant, 2 years old, 3 years old, 5-year-old, than it is when you're 65, for example, or higher. Now this, to me, is a remarkable thing, and I'm going to be careful how I describe it. My middle son is a geneticist, and he has listened to me describe this epigenetic process and has criticized me that I don't get it right, so I'm going to be careful and actually read it. But in basic terms, what is important to realize is we think about evolution, that what happens to us now may eventually change things in the future. And that is in part true, but what we don't realize is that social experience changes things immediately, and it does it through sort of this epigenetic process. So epigenetic markers control where and how much protein is made by a gene, effectively turning the gene on or off. Such epigenetic modification typically occurs in cells that confine organs, thereby influencing how these structures develop and function. Therefore, experiences that change the epigenome early in life, when the specialized cells of organs such as brain, heart, kidneys are first developing, can have a powerful impact on physical and mental health for a lifetime. The fact that genes are vulnerable to modification in response to toxic stress, harsh poverty, and these kinds of things. Nutritional problems, which our colleague from the chamber mentioned, and other negative influences underscores the importance of providing supportive and nurturing experiences for young children in the early years when brain development is most rapid. So what this means, that was for my son Thomas, just to make sure I got it right. But what it really means is, in the same way, if you, as a young child, are given not enough nutritional inputs or the wrong kinds of fast foods, for example, and things of this nature, predisposes you towards obesity, or if you're undernourished, can lead to stunting. Social experience can do the same thing for cognitive development. And to some extent, I just think about this if you're a parent. So every time you pick up your baby and you feed her, or she's wet and you change her diapers or the equivalent of diapers, or she's cold and you hold her, every time you do that, you're actually imparting yourself into her DNA. You actually become part of her biology. Now think about if parents actually understood how important their love is and that nurturing. All those moments where you get awake in the night and it's like, oh, can I ever go to sleep? And whatnot. All of this is creating healthy brains. And I think those of you that are in early childhood development, or just our teachers or our mothers, fathers, if you can just impart that wisdom to parents and whatnot, miracles can potentially happen. If you actually knew how critical you were to developing intellectual capacity for your children, and by extension, society. Because in a collective sense, the intellectual capacity of our children who become adults is the basis of your labor force. All right, so we've talked a little bit about what goes right when we nurture children, make sure they get responsive social care. If we make sure that they're fed well, you're going to create healthy brains. You're going to increase intellectual capacity. It's that simple. But now let's take a look at what goes wrong in the absence of responsive social care and how this can weaken brains.
Learning to deal with stress is an important part of healthy development. When experiencing stress, the stress response system is activated. The body and brain go on alert. There's an adrenaline rush, increased heart rate, and an increase in stress hormone levels. When the stress is relieved after a short time, apart from caring adults, the stress response winds down and the body quickly returns to normal. In severe situations, such as ongoing abuse and neglect, where there is no caring adult to act as a buffer against the stress response stays activated. Even when there is no apparent physical harm, the extended absence of response from adults can activate the stress response system. Constant activation of the stress response overloads developing systems, with serious lifelong consequences for the child. This is known as toxic stress. Over time, this results in a stress response system set permanently on high alert. In the areas of the brain dedicated to learning and reasoning, the neural connections that comprise brain architecture are weaker and fewer in number. Science shows that the prolonged activation of stress outlet can actually reduce neural connections in these important brain at just the time when they should be growing neurons. Toxic stress can be avoided if we ensure that the environments in which children grow and develop are nurturing, stable, and engaging.
So neurologists and people that study this sort of toxic stress is the term that they use that represents essentially the human response to children's response to the absence of nurturing care, to being exposed to adversity, whether that's hunger, whether that's protection-related issues, or neglect, the absence of response. They talk about this as stress or toxic stress. And they sort of divide stress into three different levels. There's positive stress. We actually need to be challenged. So if you're a fifth grader and you have to give a speech in front of your class, you're going to be nervous, you're going to be anxious and whatnot, but you need to do that in order to learn. So that would be sort of a positive stress. Tolerable stress would be, let's see, so you're in a car accident and your body, your adrenaline starts to rush. And there's a period of time in which you're kind of in shock, but then you go to your husband or your wife and your children or whatever, and things sort of settle down. That's tolerable stress. All of us can kind of get through that somewhat unscathed. But toxic stress is when your adrenaline system is put on alert and it doesn't turn off. And so the adrenaline keeps rushing and rushing and rushing. And what it actually does then is start weakening your brain circuitry. And your capacity to engage is reduced. So what we want to do with children growing up in challenging environments is maximize opportunity, but then ameliorate the kinds of risks that they face. The most critical one is having an adult present that helps buffer the child from the bad event of the adversity. So normally children, one bad thing is happening in their household. So let's just say, God forbid, but their father dies. So there's a loss in the household. Most children can get through a family death over the course of a lifetime unscathed. There's no statistical relationship between losing one parent on the one hand and negative life outcomes on the other hand. But if the father's death is followed by a reduction in economic capacity of the household, then you have two bad things happening. And many children can get through two bad things, again, statistically not leading to predictable negative outcomes. But when three bad things happen simultaneously, so father dies, the household income goes down, and they have to move, so the child leaves their school, her household ends up in a poor environment. When those things come together, then the likelihood of negative adult outcomes goes up fourfold. And every time you add a risk on top of that, it goes up statistically even more. So again, as you're thinking about working with children in poverty, for example, we have to look at the nurturing care and the nutrition, but also some protective things that go around the household income. Now, this to me is an important study. It was done in Romania and Bucharest, and some of you may be too young to remember this, but there was a time in which the government of Romania was attempting to orchestrate a political system that was quite autocratic. And part of that was actually disconnecting children from the influence of their parents, that they wanted the state to have much more say in the lives of people growing up than families. So many children were removed from their families and put in orphanages because the state thought that it could actually sort of direct children towards the type of government system they wanted. And then the political system fell apart, and the world sort of discovered hundreds of thousands of children that were in very, very low quality orphanages. And there was a group of researchers that went in and did a longitudinal study. And when they started, they did baseline on the children in the orphanages, and they found the average IQ of a child growing up in this orphanage was about 64. They had a comparison group. Those were children that stayed in families in Bucharest, so similar kinds of variables, and the average IQ there was 104. So globally, about 100 is average. So in Bucharest, it was a bit higher than average. But look at the difference between 64 and 104. And then think about functionally, what can someone with an IQ of 64 do? He could probably be trained to, like in an office, they can pick up trash and empty it and whatnot, dress themselves, maybe feed themselves, but really not too much beyond that. So pretty serious consequences. And if you look at the graphs, again, this is a representation of kind of neuroimaging. The graph on the right shows what an IQ of 104 looks like. So there's lots of energy. The orange and the yellow represent lots of things going on inside the brain. So think about the first video. Lots of connectivity. The image, the scan on the left shows what the image is of a child that has an IQ of 64. And look at the difference just in terms of raw capacity, not content, but the capacity, intellectual capacity, is significantly diminished. And that's essentially the result of neglect. Now the good news is when they moved the children out of the orphanages by the age of 2 and put them in families, over the course of several years, the IQs of these children went up into the 90s. So it was a significant increase from 64 into about mid-90s, but never got up to where the children and families were. If you waited until after they were 2 years old, again, the criticality at developmental enrollment, the IQs went up, but never got beyond about 80 mid-80s. So again, the good news is plasticity, we can make improvements. It's never too late. The bad news is if you wait too long, the change, the positive change is going to be less. Now this is about as bad as it gets. So what happens when there's lots of adversity and there's no one there for children? And again, if you've read your history, whatnot, there was genocide in Rwanda. Rwanda is a country in the Horn of Africa, Eastern Africa. And I won't go into the whole history, but probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 million people out of about 6 million people were slaughtered. And there were many, many refugees. And the refugees that went into Zaire, which is now the Democratic Republic of the Congo, there was a major cholera outbreak, epidemic, and at one point there was 10,000 people dying a month. And you'd find relief workers would show up in the morning and they'd find babies sitting next to dead bodies, and they'd pick the babies up and they took them to what was orphanages, which essentially was run by Caritas, and it was just plastic sheeting. And they had the babies, they had army cots laid out in a row, and they had the babies just laying on the army cots, and they had the IVs in their arms. So they were getting nutritional input, but nobody picked up the babies. Nobody picked up the babies and held them. They just lied there. and they were dying at an alarming rate. And I remember I was working for the UN at the time, going in there and picking up one of the boys, and he was physically alive, but already sort of spiritually and mentally gone. And looking into his eyes, you could just see he was not present. He was already drifting off. And the missing thing was the human relationship. It was the human relationship. And our Caritas colleagues didn't understand. They thought it was just about nutrition, and they didn't understand. The point being, we do not come into the world outside of relationships. We do not survive outside of relationships, and we do not thrive outside of relationships. And this is called failure to thrive, when babies just do not have human contact, and they cannot live, even if you feed them. Last but not least, the Jamaica study to me is very, very important, because it focused on a group of children who were growing up in poverty. In some cases were stunted. And they looked at what kinds of interventions could help them the most. So one of the groups got improved nutrition. One of the groups got improved social care or stimulation. And one of the groups got both. And then there, unfortunately, were comparison groups that got neither. And this graph may be hard to see, but basically what it says is if you improve the nutrition, intellectual capacity went up. If you improve social care, intellectual capacity went up. But when you put those two things together, it was like, Technicolor, it was synergies. It went up a lot. So again, the combination of social care and nutrition was the most efficacious intervention. Thank you. Can you hear me? No. Good. So again, combination of nutrition and social care was the winning formula. Okay, summarizing. Pregnancy. Now let me ask you, is there anyone in the room that disagree with that or suggest that we haven't in some way at least touched on it from a scientific standpoint? Anyone want to argue against this? Okay, I'll take your silence as a no. Now this is interesting. Families in India, and frankly elsewhere, are really, really keen on making sure that their children study hard and get into college, at least start that often later in life. So if you're in high school, sometimes you pressure your children to do well, et cetera, et cetera. But what the science would say would be the road to college attainment, higher wages and social mobility starts at birth. So when we start thinking about getting our kids into college, we need to think about from the get-go, not just when they're in formal school. The best metric of child poverty may have to not do with income, so it may not be as correlated with income as it is with how often a child is spoken to and read to. There's been research that has shown the difference between children who grow up in, say, professional families and children who grow up in low-income families. They refer to it as the 30 million word gap. By the time you start school, the more advantaged children know 30 million more words than the disadvantaged children. So think about school readiness. You're coming in with a huge achievement gap before you even start formal school. So again, if we think about investments and what families can do, reading to your children, even if you're not literate, telling stories, exposing your children to words, vocabulary, things of this nature is so important. We've got to close the word gap if we want to build healthy societies. And lastly, investing in young children is a proven pathway out of poverty and into promise. There's a number of economists, human development economists, that have really come together now with a solid evidence that early investments are worth 7 to 10 times the return on investment than if you wait later in life. And so things like in the United States Head Start preschool programs and things of this, those investments will pay 7 to 10 times rate of return than waiting and trying to fix problems after they manifest themselves, either in health, mental health, delinquency, and whatnot. So proven investment early has proven to be extremely important. So that's it for me. And I want to thank you for being a great audience. And I'm going to ask you to ask questions. And if you don't, then I'm going to call on some of you and ask you a question. So it's your choice. Oh, there she is, our pioneer.
So my question,
Good morning, sir. Thank you so much for such a lovely presentation today. My question to you is that many children lost their parents during the pandemic. So how have those children, like what are the challenges, not only the emotional support, the financial support, there were a lot of things that the children have lost out on. And even though we have various NGOs and governmental schemes that are going to provide education to the children, how do we bridge the emotional gap that the children will be facing because of the lack of parents that they don't have right now? And how we as teachers will be able to provide that for our children? Thank you.
That's a great question, but if I may, can I turn the question back to you and ask you for your thoughts? What do you think should be done or is being done?
So, my mother is a doctor, and in the government hospital, she is aware of a lot of patients who lost their lives. They have many children who are just 3-4 years of age, and they have been taken up by their relatives, I would say. But emotionally, I am not aware and I am not able to understand what has been done for them. Because no matter what, when a child loses both the parents, because that has been a case during the pandemic, it's very difficult and a child doesn't understand all of those emotions at such a young age. And it is definitely going to impact in the future with the child, with its, his or her development, right? So I am not aware as a teacher what I can do, because I have been trying to ask that question to myself and how I can provide some aid to the children at the various hospitals.
Thank you for that. I wonder if any of you have done anything or observed anything being done at the school level to deal with children who lost parents that are returning to school. Is that something that you've noticed?
not not really, sir. Because what I have seen with a few students that I teach is that right now the basic thing that the students that is happening, the school is doing as such is trying to actually cover up on what education they have lost in the last 3 years, but not the emotional presence or emotional state of mind of the children. So that is what I have observed.
Thank you. Any other examples or thoughts on what happens? What can schools do? What can teachers do? What can principals do for children who are coming back to school and have lost one or more parents? Have you observed anything? Okay. I wonder, either Hannah or Sister Kathleen or Taraj, would you want to talk a bit about what the Tribal Society and the Social Welfare Society is doing in Telangana? Because they are addressing this problem. Now they have residential schools, so it's a bit different. Hannah, do you want to mention anything?
Hi everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. So some things that are happening in Telangana, it's a residential school, so when students are coming back from a break, from COVID, they're coming back to the environment that they're going to be staying in for a few months. So some things that the social and tribal welfare have talked about implementing is a moment when students come in to acknowledge as a group the trauma and some of the impacts that they've experienced. So social counseling resources, and then also a way just to check in as a collective and say, hey, this was hard, what have you experienced, and how, as teachers and as a group, can we support you? Other resources that they offer is like high quality nutrition. A lot of students are coming back very anemic, not getting enough nutrition, so they've added more beans, more eggs, more resources to their diet to help them close that nutritional gap. So those are a couple of examples.
Great, thanks, Hannah. One of the simple things that they're doing, they call it a listening circle. So when children come back, they get together in small groups with teachers, and the teachers listen to what their challenges are. It's sort of an emotional, psychological check-in. And then each student is sort of paired with two teachers that are kind of their champions. And then they also kind of engender peer support. Younger children are matched with older children, just sort of as buddies in some ways. So again, when you think about what can schools do in this area, you can't solve the problem at the origin level. So you can't bring the father back, for example. If he died, you can't really work on household income, but you can create a sensitive environment that anticipates that these children are going to be coming back with problems, and simple things like listening circles, buddy systems, kind of preparing your teachers to listen carefully to those sorts of problems and create this sort of school culture that is caring. So these are things I think that all schools can do, but we have to orient our teachers and principals to do so. All right, we have time for one more question. I'm going to call on one of you if you don't. Raise your hand. How about?
Sir,
Yes.
you spoke about the three level of stress. One is the positive, one is the other one is the tolerable, and the last one is the toxic. So, in order to reduce the toxins, there might be certain things that may be possible when the individual is moving towards the toxic current. Is there any way to prevent instead of moving towards the toxic current?
Yeah.
Is there any way to prevent?
That's a great question. In real life, well, let me give an example. So I used to spend a lot of time working with children in war zones. So the Rwanda genocide, problems in the Middle East, etc. I'm actually in Afghanistan before the invasion and whatnot. I was often asked the question, how does war affect children? So war is a bad thing for kids. How does it affect children? And the answer always is, well, it depends. It depends on, there's the event, but then there's sort of the social ecology. So parents and peers and teachers and others that are part of the equation. So an event does not necessarily correlate to a negative outcome. It depends on who is there to help the children. So the way you prevent toxic stress is make sure that a child in her household has at least one champion, if not the entire family. At the school, that teachers are relating to them as human beings, not just objects to be taught. That is so important. And then others, it has to do with connecting them to supportive and nurturing individuals. So adults and peers and whatnot. And one of the most important things you can do as a teacher, I know you're learning how to teach math or how to teach English or how to do STEM. That's important. The academic stuff is important. But how you connect with children, especially children that come from troubled environments, makes a huge difference. So if you were to ask yourself quietly, who is the champion in your life? You don't get to sit in the seat that you're sitting in unless someone or someone's encouraged you, nurtured you, looked at you and said, you have capacity, you have intelligence, what you do is important. Now, how many of you think about this? So many of us would say our mother, our father. Some of us might not, but many of us would. But think of a teacher who you remember as your champion, or someone that enabled you to get in this chair. What is it you remember about that teacher? Was she a brilliant math teacher? Was she a kind and engaging human being? Did she look at me and say, you can do it? Was it praise, encouragement? Or was it something else? My guess is most of you would not choose a teacher who was nasty. Who was your champion? Yeah.
So my champion is my project guy in Masters. So he saw the potential in me, and he was very kind enough to me to tell me about my potential, and that he saw that in me, and he's the one who motivated me to pursue my.
Now, how did he let you know you had potential? What did he do or say?
So basically, it started off as me telling him that I was facing insecurity issues in my masters, and he told me that my presentation skills were like the best he saw in his 5 years of life. So that really kind of made me realize that there might be potential in me as well.
Okay. So it was praise and encouragement, not the switch. If you don't do this, you're not going to succeed. Okay. One more example. Who was your champion?
One of my principals.
One of your principals. What did your principal do that encouraged you?
Yeah, I was a very introvert person, so he brought out, he saw the capability in me and he brought out all the.
And how did he see the capabilities? How did you know that he saw that?
He used to come visit my class and he used to observe my classes, and then he used to observe the meetings which he used to take. So we had professional development courses, and from there we went on.
That's
So
great.
he encouraged me to join the meeting.
Okay. Fabulous. Fabulous. Did anyone have a mean, nasty teacher that served as a leverage into life or career? Strict. No nonsense. I don't think so. All right. The point being this, again, and I'll stop. We don't come into the world outside of relationships. We do not survive. We do not thrive. You do not get to go to universities unless you have champions. So when we think about teaching, we want all of you to become champions. Not just good math teachers, that's important, but become champions. Thank you.
A very good morning to one and all. Thank you, Professor Neil Butti, for giving a very interesting lecture. On behalf of the Indian Merchants Chambers Knowledge and Skills Committee, we thank you for taking the invitation of Mr. Dheeraj Mehra and engaging this lecture for us at Bombay Teachers Training College. Your session threw light on how the first 1,000 days of pregnancy set the stage for fulfilling individuals' potential. So that was a very interesting insight which a non-childhood care teacher learned today, and it was very interesting, and I kind of agree with that. So thank you for that. Early experiences leave chemical signatures. So nurturing and social care is very important. That is what another learning from the session was. You also spoke about the different types of stress, such as positive stress, tolerable stress, and toxic stress, and how we need to kind of avoid the toxic stress. You also spoke about the Broschett study of institutionalizing children versus children who are living in family, and you also spoke about the Jamaican study. So overall, a very interesting lecture for all of us, a great learning experience. So thank you, Professor Butti, once again. We also thank our president, Mr. Anand Singhania ji, who personally came for the first event of the Knowledge and Skills Committee. So thank you, Professor. Thank you, Mr. Anand Singhania ji, for making it personally for the first event. President is a very busy man and he has a lot of appointments. Right now also he's just left to meet a very senior bureaucrat and politician and a lot of other action which he has to do. So we thank him for taking out time for the event. We thank Ms. Sheetal Kalgar from IMC Deputy Director, who has provided us all the support to ensure that the event happens smoothly. Thank you, ma'am, for all the support. I also take the opportunity to thank Sister Kathleen for joining us. Thank you so much. And Hannah, thank you so much for coming and helping us. Thank you. I'll fail in my duty if I don't thank my co-chair Dheeraj and Vedika. Thank you Dheeraj from University of Notre Dame for getting sir, and thank you Vedika for joining us and ensuring that this event happens. So thank you so much. Last but not the least, how can we forget the host and a dear friend, Principal Balani. Please give a big round of applause. So, Dheeraj sent me a mail. I just had to do a very small thing. It's called hit the forward button. Yeah. So I just hit the forward button to Principal Balani, and he said I'll take care of it from there. And Principal Balani told me he also did the same thing. He hit the forward button to this association called as the Wizard, the literary club, and Professor Dr. Neelu Verma and the team took it from there. So big round of applause to Dr. Neelu Verma and the entire team. Of course, how can we, the IMC team which has helped coordinate, liaison with everybody. So if we all are, individuals, they're the ones who are like the thread which connected all. So can we give a big round of applause to Sujan and Anita? I will also be failing in my duty if I now don't thank on behalf of BTTC. So the best part, Professor, this can happen only in India when you're from both sides. That means you're from INC also and you're from BTTC also. Since I'm also part of the Constituent College of the University, which is HR College, I thank on behalf of BTTC to what Professor said in the words of Professor Neil, to all the champions who have been a great audience today. So you're not just great maths teacher or great history teachers, but you're going to be great champions, and that's what you've decided today. I hope you've decided. Are you going to be champions?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much. A big round of applause to all of you. With this, now it's the time for felicitation. May I invite Ms. Sheetal Kalro, Deputy Director, IMC, to please come on the dais, and may I request Dr. Neil Bhutpi to please come for the small memento, a small token of love and appreciation on behalf of the Indian Merchants Chamber. Please give a huge round of applause to Professor. It's a very busy time. He's taking time out for all you guys. Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Thank you. May I request Ms. Sheetal to stay there? May I now invite Sister Catherine. Thank you so much, sister, for coming. So Sheetal is explaining how this memento is created. It's the artwork of the foot and mouth painters who have painted this with foot and mouth. They are persons with disability who have done this, and IMC is supporting this cause. So please give a big round of applause for this cause as well. Thank you. May I invite Hannah to please come and receive her felicitation from Ms. Kalro. Thank you. May I now invite my dear friend and the principal of Bombay Teachers Training College and the registrar of HSNC University, Principal Dr. Balani, to come on the stage. May I also invite Vedika Podar to please felicitate Principal. So to give you an insight on Vedika, Vedika is a mental health champion and she's doing some commendable work in mental health. Please give her a big round of applause. You can look up online on her and you can understand the work that she's doing. Thank you so much. So with this, we thank again BTTC College for this wonderful morning, and I'm glad that there was great learning experience today. Thank you so much. God bless you. Thanks, Neeraj.